Cool. So I think it's about 3 minutes past, so we can start just so that we don't get caught out on hump day Wednesday afternoon. We don't want to run over. We've obviously thank you all for coming. So just while we wait for a few more, I think it probably makes sense for us to kind of just go through just a few intros, right? So a lot of you know me. My name is David Shapiro. I'm the Director of Channel Sales at Overe. I spend most of my time working with MSPs, MSSPs, resellers, and distributors on how to deliver Microsoft 365 security in a way that actually scales operationally across tenants. And I'm lucky enough to be joined by Neil Shaw and David McCandless. So I don't know, McCandless, do you want to just start and then Neil just do a short intro?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm David McCandless. I'm a solution architect here at Overe. I have an original background in cloud infrastructure. I've worked at an MSP myself early in my career, and yeah, I'm here going to be sort of presenting the product, answering any technical questions, and hopefully showing you exactly what Overe does and how it can help.
Awesome.
Neil?
Hi, I'm Neil. I've been in the IT industry for over 30 years, believe it or not. For 7.5 years, I founded, built and exited an MSP in the Midlands in the UK. And now I help other MSPs grow and scale by kind of helping them with things I did right and things I did wrong and kind of giving them a bit of a fast track to the good times.
Awesome. And Neil's the guy that we're going to be picking his brain today. So one thing that is there. So again, the chat is open for questions. So please add them as we go. We have some time at the end where we would be able to read those questions out to Neil or McCandless, and they'll be able to kind of review it at the end with us all there. So without further ado, I think it's safe to say that it's good for us to start. And one thing that's for sure is that most MSPs that we speak to, they are definitely not under-tooled. If anything, it's actually the opposite, right? On paper, everything looks secure. For example, they have MFA enabled, they have conditional access is configured, Defender is deployed, and policies are in place. If you had to, for example, look at that tenant, you would probably say it's in a good place, right? But here's the problem. And this is what we're going to focus on today. What's configured doesn't always behave the way we think it does. And across multiple tenants, that gap gets bigger and bigger over time. So in this session, is going to be about understanding where your current controls break down and what's needed to prove they're still working across your tenants. So if you are managing Microsoft 365 across customers, you probably didn't design your own security stack from scratch. It was built over time. And you added all these tools for probably the right reasons. For example, you added identity tool to secure access, emails to protect users, alerting for visibility, and device policies to control those endpoints. And individually, everything makes sense. Each decision was valid at the time. But the problem doesn't show up in one single tenant. It shows up when you're operating this across 10, 50, even 100 tenants. You will end up with something that looks like strong coverage, right? You've got, for example, again, identity sitting in one place, email protection somewhere else, alerts coming from different systems, and policies managed separately. Sometimes even, especially now, you start layering in third-party tools on top of that. And it looks like we've got this covered. But what we consistently see, though, is it's not one system, it's multiple systems behaving independently. So this is probably a good first point for me to bring Neil in and ask, for example, Neil, when you were managing, this across your tenants, the size of the tenants that you were looking after, what did it actually look like day to day?
From the outside, it probably looked very polished, to be honest, and as if we had everything under full control, which I'd say probably 80% we were. But I guess from the inside, lots of tabs open, Defender, RMM, email filtering. You'd have everything open in a tab, and you'd be constantly monitoring them all for a noisy alert to pop up. I guess so. Yeah. So from the outside, it looked pretty good. From the inside, it was busy. It was time consuming, and as much as you can have all of your ducks in a row, there's always something that's going to change that you're not sure about, and you've got to be on top of that. So I think it probably felt manageable up to a certain size. When you've got 20 or 30 tenants, when you're looking after a few hundred, like we were, it can be quite a scary place to be when you've not got full visibility of everything that's going off under a single pane of glass, or the alerts aren't accurate enough to give you the confidence that everything's great. So it's, as you scale, I think it amplifies that that feeling.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of the point that we see from the outside. It all looks like control, but underneath that, it's not just one system. It's multiple different systems operating independently from each other. And again, like you mentioned, from a single tenant, that's fine, or to a certain number, that's okay. But across that bigger breadth of 10, 50, 100 tenants, and that's where we start to see things break. And this is important because this isn't a tooling problem that most MSPs are facing, because most MSPs already have really, really good tools. There's some great technology out there. From our understanding and from what we're seeing, this is more an operational problem, because what starts to happen is controls overlap, responsibilities blur, and no single system is validating everything together. So again, I put a quick question to you, Neil. When did you start, or I should actually say, where did this actually start breaking down for you? At which point?
So, am I on mute? No,
you're good. You're good.
All right. Just checking. I don't think it was the gaps, as you said. There was always a solution for every sort of issue, let's say, or a product for every thing we wanted to monitor. I think the issue was the overlaps, and that's where it started to break down, because you'd potentially get false confidence. You'd have multiple solutions reporting on the same, tech, and you wouldn't know which one was right, which one was wrong. If they disagreed, you'd have to investigate, and it was kind of quite confusing with everything that was going on. So, Defender and we used Vade Secure for a time, would be giving different reports about exactly the same email, for example. So I think a good example actually would be if you've got your RMM doing endpoint, policies, etc., and then you think, hang on, is Microsoft doing that? Or is the RMM doing that? Is Ninja doing that? Or whatever you're using? Yeah. So it's the overlaps definitely. And you configure MFA, and it's in Entra. It says MFA is enabled, and you assume it's in force. But then conditional access might have an exception on. How do you know that there's a granular exception on across multiple tenants? You just need something that can kind of go, hang on, there's a hole here. What can we do to fill it?
Yeah, and you kind of answered my follow-up question, really, is that when things weren't aligned and, you weren't sure which one to trust, was that obvious, or did you kind of have to wait until there was a fire or something went wrong before you had to kind of act on it?
So I guess the tools weren't really designed to sort of cross-check each other, and, one tech isn't going to tell, say for example, Defender's not going to tell you if your email filter's not working, and your RMM's not going to tell you if conditional access isn't configured correctly. It'll, maybe say something is applied, but it doesn't know if it's actually working. So I guess you could go weeks, months, for example, assuming something was correct and configured right, because there was no noise, there was no alert. all the noisy alerts, like the email filtering, and if someone had logged in, from a foreign country, for example, they would come up. But the actual alerts that probably really mattered to do with the identity, of the users was not really being reported on. So, yeah, it's
interesting.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, awesome. So, and just this is kind of leads into where we are now and the pattern that we are seeing consistently. And this is the pattern we see from speaking to MSPs, around the world is you start with control, right? You configure everything correctly right off the bat. And then over time, it becomes an illusion because nothing is validating that it's still behaving that way. And eventually the next point of the chain is breakdown. You hit that breakdown, and just going back to exactly what you said, it shows up in places like in your examples, Defender and email filtering tools not aligning, Intune policies and RMM tools conflicting, and conditional access looking right, but not actually enforcing what you think. And the key point here is this isn't obvious from any single dashboard. So the gap looks something like this, where most MSPs are really good at configuration, right? But configuration doesn't equal enforcement. And it definitely doesn't equal continuous validation across those tenants. So you could have MFA enabled, you could have policies in place, and you definitely would have, controls documented, and there would still be ways users could authenticate without MFA, policies not applying as expected, and access paths that no one has visibility of, not because something is missing, if that makes sense, but because nothing is validating everything together. So a lot of the times when we talk to our MSPs or just MSPs in general and getting a feel for some of the struggles, a lot of them start bringing in what secure score, right? And this is where secure score usually makes it into the conversation that we have. Now, most MSPs use it, and to be clear, it is useful, right? There's nothing wrong with secure score. It gives you a benchmark, it shows recommended configurations, and it helps you improve posture over time. But the big caveat here is secure score is not assurance. It doesn't tell you how controls behave in combination. It doesn't show you every possible access path. And it doesn't prove that what's being configured is actually still being enforced. So we've seen examples where you have this really high secure score and still have gaps in how access actually works, right? So again, Neil, I don't know, did you ever kind of use secure score, or at any point, how confident were you that what you'd set was actually being enforced?
If I'm being completely honest, and I'd like to say that our viewers in the group today were being 100% honest, I guess you're probably not going to be fully confident, to be fair. Example would be you'd set something up, you'd document it really well, you'd let all the team know that these were new policies in place. For example, you can pull a report and it shows everything is correctly configured, but you don't know exactly what it's doing because you're relying on a setting, a toggle switch or whatever being changed, and a policy being applied, and that nothing is going to interfere with that. It's going to break it. There's going to be no fighting between your solutions, your stack. Definitely weren't aware of everything that could be going on, and I think as well, policy drift is the killer. A tech one makes a policy change to allow something to happen without fully documenting it or without telling somebody, and then you do a report. Yeah, everything's still switched on because it doesn't go down to the granular level that you need it to, and then suddenly you've got a backdoor entrance in. And I think a lot of the time you're relying on assumptions and snapshots rather than continuous enforcement or monitoring. So confidence, I guess, is high when you first do it, and then over days and weeks, if you're being honest about it, your confidence would go down.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, it makes sense. And you know, even when we do again have these discussions with MSPs, this is our UK discussion, right? So appreciate everyone that could make this time slot. But this is kind of where we start to see a little bit of pushback, a little bit, right? And again, some of the response that we normally hear around is things like we'd catch that manually, or we review configurations regularly, or our engineers would have spot that. And to a degree, that is true. And in a lot of cases, teams are also investing in platforms like a Huntress, right, which is very strong endpoint coverage, SOC support, good visibility, on paper, really solid security layers. But even then, you're still relying on periodic checks, individual knowledge, that drift that you spoke about, Neil, that you don't know those changes took place, and time that for an MSP owner you don't really have. Because again, you're not validating behavior continuously, you're validating snapshots. So I know you never mentioned it, Neil, but I know that you used to run Huntress at scale, right? And from like, how confident were you that everything outside of the endpoint, especially looking at around, identity and conditional access, was actually being enforced the way you expected?
So, as I said earlier on, we weren't fully confident because Huntress, which is it's a good product, and we had many thousand endpoints protected. It was reactive. It didn't continuously monitor policies. It didn't really have much to do with policies, to be fair. It was more endpoint protection rather than enforcement or monitoring of it. So yeah, it would be good if you only did this and they did that, but you offer so much of what they already do. It makes it a really strong contender and would make me rethink. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because every product out there is good, but some are just edging it.
Yeah, just a little bit more than others.
Yeah.
It makes sense. So what we would like to do now, and what we typically would do, is kind of show you what this actually looks like in the real world, right? So no more theory, right? But actually what it looks like in practice. So what we'll do is we'll show you where these gaps normally appear, how they usually are missed, right? And what changes when you actually validate this properly. So I'm going to pass over to McCandless. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and give McCandless control. I think you got it. Perfect. There you go. And over to you,
see my screen okay?
Yeah, we can.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Shapiro. So yeah, hopefully you guys can see this is Overe that I pulled up here. So let's start here with the global dashboard. So what you're looking at here, this piece does two things really. It pulls insights from all across Overe into one place, which is like it's going to be your new home base for Microsoft. And it also displays information about all your tenants at once. So you're an MSP, you're managing multiple regional tenants, even an internal IT team. This display is ideal. And you can choose exactly which of your tenants feed into this global dashboard display that you're looking at. So we begin here with just some high-level stats about the selected tenants that you have on the global dashboard. Obviously, these are test tenants. In real tenants, we'd see millions of events watched. We'd see thousands of users. But yeah, so we show you some high-level stats about all the tenants here. And then just below, we show you these sign-in maps, which are a visualization of your Entra sign-in activity, right? But how often are you thinking about the failed sign-ins that are happening in your tenant, right? We see tenants where the CCTV camera has been trying to authenticate 100 times in the last week, and then the first time that they actually notice that is when they need to get into the CCTV recordings, right? Or we see hundreds of failed logins for a specific user. If you're not reviewing your sort of Entra sign-in logs and what's happening, maybe you have dark web monitoring, maybe you don't, but if you see hundreds of failed logins to a specific user, it's a pretty good sign that you should update their credentials, right? So this is the global dashboard view, and then what we have here is the action hub. So what the Action Hub does is it creates action tasks for you. It tells you exactly where you should look next across Microsoft, across your all of your tenants at once, and the next thing that's worth your attention, and then how you should tackle it. So we'll generate a scan of your tenant and say, hey, this tenant, we've seen there are 7 dormant enterprise applications like connected in the tenant. Should you review them? Why are they still there? What permissions do they have? No one's had any interactive sign-in activity into it. So we have far more Action Hub tasks that get created, things about optimizations, dormant users, alerts around specific patterns of activity. But the idea here is that we show you the single pane of glass, right? We say, hey, look at all these things across all of your tenants. This is the next thing that warrants your attention, rather than you going to have to sort of jump between individual tenants and dashboards. So an Overe in general is a fully multi-tenant solution, right? It's aimed at MSPs. It's designed to make your lives sort of easier and make you more confident in understanding that your tenants are well optimized, they're running smoothly, and that anything you need to give attention to, you can give attention to. And then further down, we have this site summary section. So this gives, again, information about all the tenants from the various pillars. That's how we sort of think about Microsoft tenants here at Overe. We have the assessment pillar, which is understanding, what's happening in the tenant, the policy configuration pillar, the policy. So we think about how you've configured things, what policies you have, what policies you could have, and then the alerts, the monitor and response pieces, so the ITDR perspective. But this dashboard here, you say, hey, what's going on in this tenant? Why is this red dot here? Hey, this tenant, we think there's a risky forwarding rule that's been flagged up on one of our recent deep scans. So this is sort of high level, showing you the multi-tenant aspect of Overe and how it all comes together. You can see the secure score for each of your tenants. We pull it all together into this one dashboard. But then I'd like to go through the sort of the scans and show you examples of what we highlight. And then maybe you can think about currently what your manual process is, that sort of thing, what you're currently doing at the moment, how that differs in comparison to what we're doing here. So let's start with a deep scan, for example. So we run a deep scan on a tenant. You can run them ad hoc, but we're also running them automatically in the background here at Overe. And we pull through, you can imagine there's, we're using dozens of different Entra blades, house all this information across the various tenants in Microsoft, right? So, we look at your admins, we look at their per user enforcement with MFA, we look at your conditional access policies, we look at how you've been enforced, how they apply to those end users, things like dormant users, right? So, perhaps day to day, you're coming into Microsoft, for example, you might be running a usage report, right? And then filtering out the non-interactive sign-ins, or, you come to users and you look at their valid sign-in sessions and say, hey, when's the last time that these people have logged in? But we do this all here for you. We display it on this one dashboard, and then we run it programmatically in the background and across all your tenants and say, hey, there's now, in this tenant, there's now a few users that classify as dormant in this tenant. They still have licenses. Why are they still here, for example? So that's just one piece. So, instead of doing those individual tenants, we pull it all together. And wherever you see a spanner icon, you click that, we send you straight into the Entra blade. So you don't have to think about swapping between tenants or the authentication, signing into one tenant, coming into another. And the same with risky forwarding rules, right? You might review the mail transport rules, but what about per mailbox forwarding rules, right? So you're coming to specific ones, you're looking what the mail forwarding rules are. If you've got a PowerShell script that pulls all your mailbox rules. What we do is we pull those all, we look at the email domains, like where are you forwarding those emails to, the domain reputation about that. There's plenty of areas here. So, what about Intune policy coverage, right? So you have a new tenant, like what existing Intune policies do they have? Which settings do they already have policies enforced for? Are there certain policies that you could be applying to the specific devices in this tenant that you aren't? We've got dozens and dozens of policy recommendations. So you plug it in and very quickly you understand exactly what's happening in the tenant, right? Or we have, dormant apps that come through. It's like, hey, when's the last time that this person used this app? We look at the app itself. We look at like the reply URL for the authentication with the app. We look at whether that app has been involved in sort of malicious activity elsewhere on the internet. So all this sort of would take a lot of time and effort to set up like a reporting structure and a cadence for. But not only do we run it all here, like in the deep scan, but we run it automatically and we flag up the differences, the deltas, right? So you can say, hey, since this time, this is now different about this tenant. We point you at it and we say, hey, this is time for you to come and address this. And specifically on admins with risky MFA and our MFA enforcement and understanding how MFA works in your tenant, I'd love to show you our conditional access assurance tool, which is part of our product. So the idea here is we believe this is something pretty unique that will give you a real improved understanding of your tenant and the validation of your tenant, your conditional access policy specifically. So if I just show you here, you guys are probably familiar with the screen, right? What it looks like. You have conditional access policies in a tenant. This page of policies here is everything, right? It's the front door into your organization. And what we find is no matter how mature an MSP is, they don't fully understand what the net result is of all these policies at the same time, right? So, a team lead or a customer, you can ask a question like, is MFA enforced appropriately? And the answer is yes, but that's a really hard question, especially if you don't know specifically what questions to ask. So, these policies, they're set, but they're not static, right? There's exceptions for specific users are added, devices, the attack adds a device exception to an Intune policy because they want to set it up without, having to set up MFA themselves, all these sorts of things. Maybe your sales team, maybe they can access things without using a domain joined device for specific 365 apps. Perhaps your finance team has to have an Intune compliance device when they're coming to some financially sensitive apps, or maybe you haven't even sort of set up that kind of complexity into your tenant just because of the sheer sort of intellectual workload that it takes to understand not only exactly what you should enforce, what policies you should push down, but also how they're going to change and what the net impact is going to be. So yeah, proposing policies that are going to do exactly what you think they are, and then what the net impact will be. So even if you're doing like a proper full analysis of conditional access in your tenant, which we've spoken to some sort of security consultants and what they're doing, and we find very few MSPs are actually doing full holistic assessment. It ends up looking at something incredibly cut like this, right? Where they try and build out all the groups, the personas of their users, what kind of policies they have, what's applied when, who it applies to, all that sort of thing. And it becomes basically unwieldy. And it's not something that we see most MSPs are able to justify and able to apply to their tenants. So maybe they have a very basic configuration. They don't understand, when these changes are made into, their tenant, the policy shifts, and they're just left there. And they're just saying, well, we have a reporting only policy that catches any basic authentication that got through our conditional access policies. And from our perspective, that is just not that's not enough, right? Because that reporting only policy, instead of flagging that up, it could be that it's an external actor has found a way to authenticate into your tenant without hitting any of your conditional access policies. So we built this tool, that the conditional access assurance tool, that you connect into your tenant. It syncs with your tenant. It understands all of your users, groups, how your policies are changed over time, and it flags up exactly what the gaps are in your tenant, right? So you plug a tenant in, it looks at your 20 policies, you provide it a scope, we tell you the gaps in your current tenant, and then you verify the gaps that are in your tenant, that they are meant to be there, that they're appropriately sized, right? So, and then we generate a report for each of those gaps, right? So one like this. We say, hey, we looked at your tenant, that for this group of users, if they log into these applications from these locations, none of your MFA policies apply to this user. And you say, yeah, that makes sense. No, that doesn't make sense. We validate each of the gaps rather than you trying to sort of work out what the net result will be based on thinking about all your policies at the same time and how they work. We calculate that all for you. We verify it with the Microsoft What If tool where relevant. And not only do we verify the gaps, so we say, hey, these 14 users, they can reach these apps from this country without MFA. Did you intend that? Or this one specific user, they can reach anything through basic authentication, for example. And then you understand not only what the current gaps are, but then we can make policy recommendations, right? So we say, hey, this break glass account, like, should it not be restricted to the Office IP, right? Should it not only allow basic authentication to some specific 365 admin apps that are going to be used in the recovery process? Why is this available on all the apps, right? So we can make policy recommendations. And what's amazing about this tool as well is that we can then simulate what the tenant would look like with our policy recommendation in place, then calculate this all in a couple of seconds, and then we come back to you and say, right, we've considered these extra policies in your tenant. This is what our policy is, our recommendation is. This is now the new set of gaps. And you go through and you say, right, now after we push your recommendation policy, this is a new gap. It's for 12 users. It's from when they're in this country and they have to have a domain joined device. And we look at all the policies here and we generate that report again, that you then accept the gaps. Not only do we allow you to make recommendations, we can simulate those gaps. We also flag up new gaps that are created, right? So your users move between groups, or you have a new group created. We're running this analysis, flagging up the gaps. We say, hey, since the last time we looked, there's now these gaps. Come in, acknowledge them, understand your tenant, and your conditional access is valid, and it does what you think it does. Because I can say, when you get dozens and dozens of policies, almost no one has a good grasp or understanding of what the exact impact and what the exact routes are that a user can get to authenticate into a tenant. And even if they do, they understand at point in time when they had an audit or worked through it properly. They don't understand it continuously. So that's what we've sort of built to really help improve that. So that's the CAA tool. I'll also show you our policy section. Everything in Overe is really about multiple tenants, right? We're thinking about the multi-tenant perspective. We're thinking about automation. We're thinking about doing it at scale. So you add in a tenant here. We look at your policies. We have these policy templates. So you can come in and create a based on our recommendations, right? So we look at your tenant and we look at information about your tenant, and then we make policy recommendations for your specific tenant. And then we're also adding new policy recommendations based on things we're seeing in the environment, based on functionality that Microsoft is adding all the time, right? So we see, hey, there's been a wave of spoofing of spam attacks that are utilizing the direct send functionality, where you can sort of bypass and use legacy authentication for sending. It's used by some old printers. You come here and then you enforce, and then in one click you've disabled the direct send functionality within a tenant. Or we'll see in the latest spam wave a specific file extension is being used by phishing attempts. We'll say, hey, it makes sense to add this on top of your current Defender Exchange Defender configuration. Add this new policy file extension and block it from getting through to your inboxes. So all the time, that we're making recommendations based on what we're seeing. We can also show you what you can currently, what you could if you had an increased license tier with Microsoft, right? So that might spark a conversation with your customer and say, hey, I know we're on this current license tier. Here's what you could implement if you move it over to the list license tier, and then you can come into Overe and push that instantly with a set of policy recommendations. So as I said, everything is at the individual tenant level. You can set exclusions at individual tenant level, exclude specific groups at that granular level, but we also have templates. So you can set up a group of policy recommendations. Perhaps you've got you're happy with the tenant configuration of one tenant. You want to push it to multiple others. You have one that a certain type of business has to be met with a sort of compliance framework where that it meets up with the specific requirements of a compliance framework, right? So we have all of our recommendations around the different types, Intune policy, Defender, whether they have a relevant compliance framework, sub-control, we've got those all mapped. And you understand not only point in time, this is the configuration, but we also have the concept of enforcement, which means Overe becomes the source of truth for your policies. So no one can come into a tenant, change any of these values without proper, change control. Overe will say, no, this is the established agreed upon configuration of the tenant, and we'll revert it back and provide you that audit trail to say, hey, we had to revert this because this was changed in your tenant. So not only point in time what a tenant looks like, but that it can't be reverted otherwise, because Overe will sync with it, come back and say, no, this is what the value should be, and put that back. So you can know, it's important for some continuous compliance, that it's constantly being assessed, that your posture is what you thought it was at the time, and that it still is that way. And then I'll come to our ITDR piece. So Yeah, we're pulling through millions of events, right? That would come through. We have very fast response times. They're significantly faster than Hunters and SAS alerts. If you're interested in that sort of thing, we have a very deep rule breadth, and we have a very fast adaptation learning time. So very quickly we get up to speed with what looks like normal in your tenant, and then we start generating alerts on pattern of activity by identities, people doing things in your tenant, who's doing them, what are they doing. We create those alerts around those patterns of activities, and then we give them a corresponding severity, right? So we can generate email notifications based on this pattern of activity, webhooks, you can pull them through the API. So the idea is that we have dozens and dozens of rules. So, if we see like a file gets deleted and then someone removes it from the recycling bin, we create an alert for that. And then you can configure if that kind of activity warrants an email notification or a webhook push, or you want to ingest that. And then we also give you the ability to auto respond based on that pattern of activity. So we'll say, hey, revoke the session for that user. Revoke, and then any potentially stolen tokens are expired and they're forced to authenticate again, or you block that user automatically. So the idea here that you have real flexibility over what patterns of activity people are doing. You can set up customized automation based on those patterns of activity. And you configure this based on, you start with critical, and then you look at the alerts that have been generated over time, and you gradually ratchet it up and find that balance between security and sort of convenience and usability. You obviously don't want to be revoking and blocking people who are just doing something a bit dodgy, right? But we also allow exclusions. So hey, we know the CEO is going to be traveling and going to be working in China, for example. Let's change how we interact with those alerts for that specific user. But we're pulling threat intelligence from multiple sources. We're enriching the data. We show you exactly who did what. In the tenant, we're saying, hey, some of our threat intelligence services have seen this IP that you did this activity in your tenant is being used for malicious activity sort of elsewhere in the internet. And we'll change the severity of the alert based on that pattern of activity. So the idea is that very quickly, this rules-based pattern is done, and then we allow that auto response. So all of this can be auto responded to, so that there isn't like a tech that has to come and say, right, this is the pattern of activity, investigate this. The automatic response happens in the tenant based on exactly how you'd like to configure it. So if in your tenant, we never create a new user, make it a global admin, and then it signs in shortly afterwards. We know that's not our change control process with the tenant. You tell Overe, if you see that pattern of activity, block that account straight away. And we have dozens and dozens of these patterns of activity. So you know what normal looks like. We develop an understanding of what normal looks like, and you can be confident that your tenant is safe from an identity perspective, and you're understanding what's happening in your tenant. And then all of this feeds into the reports that we generate in the tenant. So I know, it's so important, like as Neil said, right, that your customers really have trust in you as an authority with Microsoft in all areas of their businesses. But specifically Microsoft, right, it's one that users really interact with day to day. So it's more like a disproportionate impact, right, on their users. The C-suite of the company you're supporting, they might not understand like why you need this specific web application firewall, or why this specific network device is important, why it's so much better than, why you need these servers over these servers, you need these specs. But with Microsoft, they're using Microsoft day to day. They know they use it to sign in, that all of their sensitive data is on the other side of their authenticator, right? So showing value, showing you understand and protect Microsoft is really important from our perspective in terms of showing an MSP how important that they are to their customer. So we generate these reports. We say, in a real tenant, be like, hey, there's been 1 million events that we've watched. We've created these alerts based on those events. These are all the users that we've monitored in the tenant. These are the policy changes that we've made into the tenant. These are the ones that have had to be reverted. These are the alerts that have been generated. So that's the idea, that we have these value reports that can be sent to the customer that help understand not just when something goes wrong, but in general, the value that you're providing as an MSP from the security perspective. And we find that that's invaluable in terms of customer retention. And again, can use Overe as a prospecting tool, right? Overe itself is so easy to set up. You create an organization, you generate a link, and then you send that to an administrator or a cloud app administrator in a 365 tenant. And then it's one click, you give us the permissions into the tenant, and then the connection lives between Overe and the tenant, right? So it's a very quick setup process. We have people using it as a prospecting tool. They plug it in and they say, why is your existing MSP not doing this? And it's really useful in sort of getting those conversations started. And again, we feel this as a tool is really important for operationalizing Microsoft, knowing what to do next, validating what is happening in your tenant, and showing you what it is that you should do next and where you should come and what deserves your attention. So yeah, that's Overe. I'd recommend you just plug a tenant in. We do offer a trial, and I'm sure you'll get value out of it. We have people coming in very confident about their configuration, that they know exactly what's going on, but we always find something every single time. So yeah, please take the challenge, I suppose.
Awesome, man. Appreciate that. As always, it's always yeah, it's always interesting seeing it. But what we want to make sure that you guys understand and what you've seen over there is this isn't about adding more noise into your stack and into your day-to-day life, right? Especially as a business owner on that side. This is about understanding where things work, where there's overlaps, and where it doesn't behave the way you expect. And more importantly, being able to prove that across every tenant that you manage. And what MSPs typically find is once you actually have that level of visibility and control, a lot of the tools that you actually are relying on today are they kind of either overlap or they become redundant or aren't giving you the assurance that you thought they were meant to be giving you. So instead of managing more tools, what we would like is to simplify the way you operate. And when MSPs start approaching this differently, a few things change. You move from assumption to validation. You move from configuration to enforcement, and from being reactive to actually being in control. So instead of asking, is this configured? You start asking, is this actually working the way we think it is right now? So if, again, guys, you are managing Microsoft 365 across multiple tenants, this is definitely worth looking at properly, because the gap isn't obvious, but trust us, it is there. And once you see it, the problem is you can't really ignore it. If you want to go, if you want to go deeper on this, you can run it against your own tenant, like what McCandless said. Take up the challenge, see what actually shows up, because that's usually where we see those kind of light bulb moments or the click, right, in our MSPs and in our customers, is when what they thought looked secure isn't actually behaving the way that they expected. Now, I'm going to drop the link in the channel. When we take questions, you can scan the barcode, you can go to app.overe.io, and you guys can start a 14-day trial where you can test it, run it, try and break it as best we can. So yeah, what I'm going to do is if technology works, you guys can start that trial. Again, like McCandless said, super easy to set up. Once you connect your tenant, it will start that 14-day trial. You guys can play around, have a look, run deep scans, definitely set up your auto responses, play around with some policies, move some from monitor to enforce, from disabled into active, try and harden that tenant as much as you can. And then what we'll do is we'll send the recording out to everyone. And if this is something that you wanted to dive a bit deeper with, pick Neil's brain, have a chat with McCandless as well. We'll definitely be able to arrange a call and go through things a lot more personalized according to your business, your tenants that you look after, and so forth. But again, thank you everyone for joining. McCandless, Neil, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. And everyone else, thank you so much. I know it's a hump day, Wednesday afternoon, so appreciate it all. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us. I probably bugged you all on LinkedIn anyway multiple times, so appreciate you guys showing up. But have a good evening, everyone. Any questions, just reach out and ask.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Bye-bye.